49 years ago yesterday, Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali squared off in the Thrilla in Manila.
Frazier's badly hurt.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining me in the SUV on this Wednesday. Happy hump day, I hope, here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Yesterday marked 49 years since what is generally regarded to be the best fight in boxing history, given the combatants, the history between them, the fact that they're both important historical figures in the sport of boxing, and the fact that it's just one hell of a incredible, brutal, heart-rending, sad, uplifting, inspiring, devastating boxing match. It might be the most of all of that ever. On October 1st, 1975, heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali and former champion Smokin' Joe Frazier met in Quezon City, Philippines, for the third and final time. Each man had won. They had split the first two fights. Frazier famously beat Ali in the fight of the century. Frazier was actually the champion at that point in time. It's too complicated to get into, but Ali was undefeated former champion, and Frazier had taken the title during Ali's exile period. And then in 74, after Joe had lost really badly to seemingly invincible young George Foreman, they fought in January of 74 in what was kind of an eliminator. I don't know if they used the phrase eliminator, but Joe and Muhammad fought again at Madison Square Garden in 74. And that was a 12-round fight, which Ali, he won it pretty comfortably. It's a good fight. The guys were both in phenomenal physical condition. The 12th round, they're moving, and you wouldn't even know that it wasn't the first or second round. That's how fresh they looked after, a tough fight. Not as brutal and, ridiculous from an intensity perspective as the first one, but a pitched battle, and both guys looked like they could go another 10 rounds. That's how incredible their condition was. But then Ali surprised everybody and beat George Foreman. And this is where you get into the styles make fights, because Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali fought a total of 41 rounds over 3 fights. And I don't know that Ali got that close to ever flooring Joe Frazier until rounds 13 and 14 of the Thrilla in Manila 49 years ago today. And yet Ali beat George. Ali fought Ken Norton to a standstill 3 times. There are people that would say, Kenny could have gotten the decision in all 3 of those fights. Norton fought Foreman, and Foreman steamrolled him. It wasn't even a contest. It was over before it started. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff with styles making fights, and one person's style being difficult for another great fighter. And then you just look at some and say, geez, you telling me that you don't think that Ken Norton could have ever beat Ernie Shavers? No, I don't know. It doesn't look that way. And I don't know that Joe Frazier would have ever beaten George. He would have maybe one time in 100, he lands a home run bomb left hook. But even then, the way George could take a big shot, would have to do a lot more than that. Pressure fighters. George Foreman was just chopping him down. But that's beside the point. Both Ali and Frazier were well past their best. And Frazier's prime was very narrow. Ali had a slightly longer prime. Ali's prime was 1964 until his exile period, which began after the Zora Foley fight, also at Madison Square Garden, in 67. And when he came back, he was still great, but he was not what he had been. He was a little slower. He wasn't easy to hit, but he was easier to square up. He was easier to hit with more than one punch at a time than he had been previously. And Joe landed a lot of combinations in that fight in 71, and to some extent the fight in 74, that the Ali of 66, 67, he would have been able to dodge and defend, and it would have been very difficult for Joe to put together a sustained attack. Because you can go back to the Ali, even starting in 63, with the Henry Cooper fight, where Cooper almost knocked him out of the ring. Even top-end opponents had a lot of difficulty putting punches together. You saw this in later years with certainly Floyd Mayweather, with the shell, that defense that he did, the shoulder roll. You could land punches, but you couldn't really sustain an attack and land 5-6 shots out of a 10-punch flurry. It just didn't happen. But Ali in the early 70s, he had to take shots to get his in. He became a different kind of fighter, more willing to brawl. And that was to his health's detriment, not surprisingly. But going into the Thrilla in Manila, Ali had defeated Foreman in 74, and then he had the Chuck Wepner fight, which was what inspired Sylvester Stallone to write Rocky, a kind of club fighter who goes the distance. In the case of Wepner, almost went the distance with the champ, but he was still on his feet when the fight was stopped in the last round. So it was close enough. Anyway, it's fiction, right? But that's what inspired Stallone. Ali didn't really look very good that night. But the fight against Ron Lyle, he is very sharp. Now, he was behind on the scorecards in that fight going into the 11th round when he ended up stopping Lyle. But if you watch that fight, there's not 1 second where you don't think he's winning it, and not just because you know that he won. Because that ring generalship is so potent and immaculate that even though Lyle has his moments, and Lyle could really hit. Remember, he knocked George Foreman down either 2 or 3 times when they fought. So he was not a guy, Jimmy Young, throwing, just a counterpunch or trying to outpoint somebody without necessarily looking to separate them from their senses. But Ali had a huge rally in the 11th round and beat Ron Lyle. And he looked as good in that fight physically as he did against George. Again, a different kind of fighter. Ron Lyle was a brawler, a slugger, but he also was a good boxer. And even though I hate to say it this way, he learned how to fight in prison. His technique, you could argue, was a little cleaner than George's. Like, Lyle threw more conventional punches, and he landed some shots, and Ali ate him and walked through him, and you never sensed for a second he thought he was in trouble. So when Ali signed to fight Frazier for the 3rd time, because of the way that Joe had lost to Frazier, because of the way that Ali had beaten Ron Lyle, in Ali's mind, now he never said this, but in Ali's mind, he didn't think that Joe would have beaten Ron Lyle. And Joe could never have beaten Foreman. He didn't think that the matchup was just all wrong. So Ali had the idea that Joe was through. Now, he didn't stop to think, or if he did, he didn't say this, that, I'm nowhere near what I probably was when I fought George. So if Joe is past it, well, I'm certainly past it. But Ali had the idea. I don't know why or where he got this from. And he didn't go public with this. This is something that came out years after the fight. Dr. Ferdy Pacheco, his friend, confidant, and his personal ring physician, who was at, he was at some of the training sessions, but he was always at ringside, just in case Ali had a cut. But he was also there for moral support. Pacheco was almost like an amateur psychiatrist. So Ferdy Pacheco said that going into what became the Thrilla in Manila, and it was actually Ali who coined that phrase. That was not Don King or anybody involved in the promotion. It was Ali who famously said, "It will be a thriller and a chilla and a killer when I get the gorilla in Manila." And it really wasn't very nice. He was implying that Joe Frazier looked like a gorilla, I guess. And he and Frazier had a really kind of fascinating, sometimes contentious, and I don't just mean in the ring, but it was more that Ali just said a lot of stupid stuff to piss Frazier off, thinking that he could get a little bit of a psychological edge. But I don't really think, there were certain fighters it seemed to work on, but Joe wasn't one of them. Even though, Joe obviously wanted to bust him up, but Joe tried to do that with everybody. Joe was in there with Bob Foster, a guy he liked, and he was trying to take his head off. And Ron Stander, another guy he never had beef with. Joe just was going to do what he was going to do anyway. So the Thrilla in Manila, Ali was going through personal turmoil. He was divorcing his second wife, Belinda, and he was already kind of hooking up, or he was close to being almost engaged to Veronica, his third wife. And when he was in the Philippines, not long before the fight, according to both Dundee, that was Ali's trainer, Angelo, the famous Angelo Dundee, who also worked with George Foreman when he fought Holyfield, and most famously, he was Sugar Ray Leonard's guy. You're blowing it now, son. You're blowing it. Right before Leonard came back to beat Thomas Hearns in 81. But they both said there was a terrible screaming match in Ali's suite. And I mean, yeah, he's a professional, and he's going to be focused on the fight. But generally speaking, within 72 hours of a world heavyweight title fight that's going to be simulcast for the day almost 50 years ago around the world, you don't want to be getting into a terrible argument with a loved one. Even if you're splitting up, it's not good. Your mind is going to be elsewhere. But what Dundee and Pacheco had both independently said is that Ali himself was convinced that Joe was at the end. Not just that he was past his prime, because Ali knew he couldn't move. His body didn't respond to training the same way. He was not blind to the fact that he was, not the man that he had been a decade earlier. But he thought Joe was really just at the end, and there was no reason for Joe to continue to fight. Well, we're going to go out there and I'm just going to take him out. Ali actually thought he was going to take him out early. Now, in Ali's entire career, that was never his process, because he was a guy who moved around the ring. He kept distance. He used the jab, sometimes to try to hurt his opponent, other times to find range for the right hand. He had different processes and different styles. He was the kind of guy that used to say he always knew what tools to bring to a fight. It was something that was just a gift, something intrinsic in him that didn't necessarily have to be taught, like, how to try to take away an opponent's jab is something that you can teach a young fighter. But his instinct of knowing what to do in the Foreman fight, he also came out very aggressive, even though I don't think he really believed he was going to knock George Foreman out in the first or second round. But he wanted to mix things up in that fight, and he took Foreman by surprise by throwing right-hand leads one after another in the first round. And the truth is, if you go back and just watch the first round of Ali Foreman, if George did not take such a good shot, Ali landed some of the cleanest right-hand leads of his career. And by right-hand lead, I mean he's not throwing the jab to set up the big right hand. He's simply firing. And it's a bit disrespectful to do that to a world heavyweight champion like George Foreman, but that was part of the plan. George would never expect that I'm going to come out there looking to take him out and not just waiting and seeing if I could move around the ring. So Ali's strategy for Frazier, he didn't say this, but it was similar. I'm going to see if I can get Joe out early. We'll just find out just how washed up this guy is. So unfortunately for Ali, Joe was not washed up, and he was actually in fantastic fighting shape, as both men had been in New York in 1974. Now, physically, Ali was not quite as fit, or at least he didn't look as fit in Manila as he did in New York, where his condition, he had the abs like when he was a kid. He was really in great shape, as he had been when he fought Ken Norton in the return fight. That was the lightest that he had been since the mid-60s, and he's still a very young man, but not everybody is always going to have abs. You're different. You look at Evander Holyfield, he looked shredded in almost every fight he ever had, right? Even when he came back with Vitor Belfort a couple of years ago, which was not a great idea, he still cosmetically and physically, guy looked fucking awesome. But Ali went out there and he landed some huge shots on Joe early. And there's a moment, I believe in the second round, where Ali, if he hit harder, would have ended the fight early as he hoped. Now, Ali used to do this thing just to kind of, usually it was just to piss off his opponent, where he would stick his paw out and just fuck with him. He did it to Liston in the first fight during the fifth round when he couldn't see, and the audience was laughing. They thought it was funny, but he was, in that instance, he wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to make sure he knew where Liston was relative to him because he couldn't fucking see. Well, Ali puts his left hand out as if he's jabbing, but he's not. He's simply holding his hand out towards Joe Frazier. And Joe slaps the hand down. And Ali puts it out again, and Joe slaps the hand down. But when the first couple of times he slapped the hand down, he did not move. He did not move his right hand that much. The third time Ali stuck his paw out, Joe was getting angry. He wanted to get on with the fight. What the hell's the lip doing? I hate this guy. Whatever he's thinking to himself. And rather than simply tap his hand down, Joe knocks it down, drops his guard. Ali was not simply clowning and playing to the crowd. He was doing this deliberately so that Joe would do exactly what Joe did in that moment, where instead of doing that, he angrily swatted his hand down, dropped his guard. Ali landed a right hand. When I say it is as clean a shot, the cleanest single shot that Ali ever landed in his career. It's not the punch that, ended the fight with Foreman. It's a shot that knocked Carl Mildenberger down, and he hit him so hard that Mildenberger actually somersaulted on the canvas, and then his body jumped. He hit the guy so hard it was insane. Mildenberger still got up. But he landed a shot on Frazier when Frazier swatted his hand down, temporarily exposing the point of his chin. Joe staggered. And it was rare that Ali even got Joe to stagger in all of the rounds they fought. That is how tough Joe was, how much vitriol he had, presumably. He got himself all geared up. Even though you can find tons of footage of these two guys in the early to mid 70s when they were on with Dick Cavett, joking and laughing and having fun with each other, even though they knew they were going to go out and try to beat the crap out of each other. But in this moment, in this fight, whatever it was in Joe that burned, he wanted it bad. And Ali lands this incredibly perfect shot. He got his full weight in the punch. He didn't punch off his back foot or anything like that. He fully committed to the shot, landed right on the point of the chin. If it is a different fighter delivering the shot, if that's George Foreman, the fight's over. The guy's unconscious and probably going to the hospital. He probably breaks his jaw, maybe breaks his nose, knocks out 10 of his teeth. Joe staggered, and Ali followed up. But he did not land another clean shot in the exchange. Joe survived the round, and Joe had gotten his wits completely back. And I believe at the end of the round, he did something kind of funny because Joe wasn't one to clown. Occasionally he would match Ali and say stuff, but he wasn't one to match him. But in this instance, they were going back to their corner, and Frazier made a move like he was pretending he was pulling Ali's trunks down. And the crowd fucking loved that because she didn't expect Joe to do that. And it was a signal to Ali that Joe was not going anywhere and that the champ was in for a long night. And so still in the early part of the fight, the guys are mixing it up and it's very competitive. Again, the rounds are not easy to score. But supposedly, probably about the fourth, maybe the fifth round, Ali, as they're, at close quarters and Joe is banging and Ali is again trying to keep distance, Ali supposedly said, "Joe, they told me you was through." And Frazier said, "They lied, champ. They lied." And so these two guys, these incredible warriors, these lifelong frenemies, combatants. They met in 1964 when Ali had just won the heavyweight championship and Joe won in the Olympics. That's how far back they already went back, more than a decade. They're in their early 30s in Manila. They already went back more than a decade that they knew each other. And Joe had helped Ali when Ali had the financial troubles during his exile. That's what made it kind of really not good with all the acrimony, because Frazier felt bad for him. He loved him as a fighter, obviously, knew he was probably going to have to fight him at some point. But they went back and forth in Manila. And there were moments where it appeared that Ali, because early in the fight, Ali, starts strong and shoots a lot of his bolt. And then he tries to kind of conserve energy. Easier said than done when Joe is hitting you in the ribs, hitting you in the kidneys and just blasting away. Frazier concentrated a lot of his attack on the body, but he still landed some big booming left hooks. I think he landed a big shot either at the end or near the end of the sixth or the seventh. Again, a punch that is supposed to floor, not necessarily end the fight, but floor a big heavyweight like an Ali. And Ali simply went back to the ropes. The fans went crazy, covered up, and that was pretty much it. But the fight was up for grabs. And after 10 rounds, Ali supposedly was thinking of quitting. Like, what am I doing out here? What the fuck am I doing? It's like 90 something degrees. Both guys are sweating buckets. Who knows the levels of dehydration? You can't even conceive of what was going on in there. Because, Madison Square Garden, even back then, it's not going to be 90 degrees in the arena unless there's a power outage. It's going to be climate controlled. Not you're going to be comfortable, but fighting at 68 degrees as opposed to fighting at 92 is going to make a difference on your energy and what will tell as far as stamina. And even if you might get a little dizzy just from the fucking heat, you're more likely to get knocked out. It's ridiculous. It doesn't even have anything to do with punches. So somewhere deep within Ali, there was the little voice that said, you're going all the way on this fight. You're not quitting. If it's your destiny, if this is where you go, this is where you go. And who better to be up against than Joe? And both of those guys, I don't think they necessarily voiced it to themselves as the rounds piled up and the damage to Frazier's face began to become more and more acute. His eyes were swollen and starting to close. But each guy clearly made their peace with whatever was going to happen on this night. That they were both committed, they were going to go the distance, and we'll see what the judges have to say, but neither one of those guys was going to yield. There was not going to be anybody getting a 10 counted over them or anything like that. They were going to just keep going. Whatever special magic, in some cases it's terrible because of the damage they did to one another that night, but whatever magic they had to be able to just continue to absorb bombs and keep moving forward and not just holding on for dear life or anything like that. They both had it. You know, and Iron Mike Tyson, who loved both guys, but especially Ali, who was his idol growing up, and then his friend in later years, of course. But Tyson has talked about the fact that there were certain guys in the sport, and we knew he meant Ali, but in this instance, he definitely meant Frazier. They were willing to die in the ring. They were willing to die. They made their peace with it. This is how I go. This is how I go. And in round 13, Frazier could no longer see out of either eye. He could just see like almost a blur in front of him. And Joe could still throw. He was presumably exhausted, but Joe was in such incredible shape from the cardiovascular perspective. He's still throwing. He's still winging. And Ali, I don't know where he got the energy from with all of the crap in his personal life that he was going through, as I said, with the soon-to-be ex-wife. He just kept, it was like he was getting a recharge. Somehow in the minute between rounds, he'd come back to the corner at the end of the seventh, looked like he could barely get up from the stool, and somehow here he goes. He's ready to fucking go. He's ready to fight. So in round 13, Ali knows he's ahead on points. And by that, I mean, there was enough information, even though the scorecards were not, he knew that he was winning. He had done enough. He was probably ahead 7-5, maybe 8-4. And he was content to just try to outbox Joe the rest of the way. He wasn't really squaring him up. He wasn't trying to take any chances and give Joe a chance to maybe duck under and hit him with a big left hook that could end the fight. You just don't know with these things. Now, that never actually happened to Ali, but you don't know what's going to happen because he got hit by that incredible howitzer of a left hook in the first fight, went flying, and he was up at the count of 3. And it was the 15th round after they had been fighting for close to an hour. But anything's possible, right? You saw George Foreman lose 8 of the first 9 rounds to Michael Moore, land a single right hand. It didn't even look like a loaded punch. Fight's over. They could have given him a minute. The fight was still going to be over. So in the 13th round, after this already incredible pitch battle where both guys had to be dehydrated, had to be a little dizzy and loopy from how hot it was in there, Ali lands a few shots. He's winning the round, and he looks content to just win the round. He's not taking chances. He's not loading up, and he's not really advancing on Joe. He's not taking risks. He's exhausted. He's content to just run out the clock, win the round, land shots, don't take any chances. Whatever's going through his head, it's some version of that. And then Ali lands a right hand, a short, chopping right. Not a loaded punch. He hit it off his back foot, but he landed it perfectly, and Frazier's mouthpiece went flying. Like that. 30 feet out of the ring. And Ali started landing and landing and landing and landing and landing. Joe would not go down, and that was the end of the 13th round. And Don Dunphy, who was the lead broadcaster, what an incredible voice he had. He said something like that was the biggest round for either fighter in this round. And so now the sense was Ali was not going to lose a decision. Like, I mean, it's always possible with the judging, but they tended to favor him because of the ring generalship. And he was going to win most of the close rounds just because he looked good doing whatever it was he was trying to do out there. So in round 14, unfortunately, Frazier's face was even worse. His eyes were even more closed. And Ali had this look, and Joe had this look. I think it was George Plimpton who once talked about this, that two fighters, towards the end of a really hard fight, they almost start to get a bit of a gentle look. They looked a little bit glazed and dazed, and they don't have normally the kind of, Mike Tyson or Fernando Vargas, the kind of snarl that they might have. So the guys both looked exhausted coming out for the 14th. And it was more of the same, where Ali was landing, but he wasn't taking any risks. He was content to get to the end of this round, and hopefully I can get up and get out there for the 15th, because he couldn't have been feeling anything other than like, well, I'm going to die tonight, but you know what? I'm going to do the best I can not to, and I'm going to win the fight, and then maybe I'll die. That's how horrendous he felt. And he talked about this afterwards, closest thing to dying you could imagine. So in round 14, there is a moment, and it's beautiful and horrible at the same time, where Ali is landing, not loading up, similar to the previous round. And he lands a right hand on Joe. Joe has his back to the camera. Ali is in front, facing. Joe staggers into the ropes. And when I tell you there was a look on Ali's face of just pure exhaustion, and not in the conventional sense, but it's a pure exhaustion because he's like, now I'm going to have to throw more punches. Like, he was content to do what he was doing, but Joe staggering, it meant, I guess I have a chance to end the fight. Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to keep doing this with this guy? So Ali went after Joe, landed a boatload of punches. And there's even a moment, I think it was Flip Wilson, the actor who was working part of the fight. He did little bits of commentary. There were a couple of other people that got in there with Don Dunphy. And Ali is landing so much that Flip Wilson, who is not a boxer, he was an actor, he actually shouts, "Go down, Joe," as the 14th round is coming to its end. Everybody was thinking the same thing. They got to stop this fight. This is horrible. It's beautiful from the perspective of this sport, but it had already gone on too long. They probably shouldn't have let Joe come out for the 14th. So at the end of the 14th, with the outcome presumably no longer in doubt, again, the only way Joe would win is if somehow he squares Ali up, or Ali just collapses from exhaustion. But when Joe got back to his corner, his handler, his chief second, Eddie Futch, said, "Kid, I can't send you back out there. The fight's over." And Joe supposedly said, No, I want him, boss. I want him. He said, "No, I can't send you back out there. No one will ever forget what you did out here today." And that's when Eddie Futch turned to the ref, because the ref, comes over to make sure the fighters are okay. That's normal stuff. And when the ref came over to check on Joe, Eddie Futch put his hand up and said, "Fight's over. My guys had enough. It's over." And they raised Ali's hand in victory, and Bundini Brown was crying. That was Ali's kind of hype man. And Ferdy Pacheco was crying. And Ali said that he felt a sense of relief that he couldn't even imagine, because he knew there was a chance in his mind, if we both went out there, one of us could have gone. We could have died. That's how much we gave. And it was a good stoppage. We didn't need to see any more. The guys gave more of themselves than they ever should have. And this is one thing where if it's a 12-round fight, it was brutal, but Ali wins a 7-5 decision if it's a 12-round fight, and that's it. Everybody goes home. But those 13th and 14th rounds, like the 13th and into the 14th with Leonard Hearns, 6 years later, that's what separates. We're never going to have another 15-round fight. We're never going to have a fight with as much back and forth, impossible levels of damage being accrued on the face of one fighter after a point where the ref could have theoretically stopped it. But especially when it comes to a championship fight, you want to give a former champion every opportunity to shoot his bolt and do what he can. Eddie Futch protected Frazier that day, and it was a good stoppage. It is, I think, the greatest fight in boxing history because of the personalities, because of the rivalry. You know, it's up there with Yankees-Red Sox, greatest rivalry in sports. And if you ask me, is it a better trilogy than Holyfield-Bowe, Fury-Wilder? Yeah, it is. Because of the particular history of the two guys and how they brought out the best and the worst in each other. And when it was all said and done, when Joe Frazier passed, Ali mourned. He mourned him like he was a brother. And I believe that even with all the acrimony, that if the roles had been reversed, I believe Joe would have mourned his former rival in much the same way. And one of the great Ali quotes about Frazier is that when he wasn't clowning or promoting a fight or anything, he said, "If God ever calls me to a holy war, I want Joe Frazier fighting beside me." High praise from the heart. This has been episode 318 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day, I hope, with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.